Okay, we're going to be talking about the battles of the Civil War, just the major ones, not all of them. There's over 200 battles in the Civil War, so we're going to talk about the major battles. Standard 9 says the student will identify key events relating to the course of the Civil War, and in that course we're going to talk about these battles. 9D, explain the importance of Fort Sumter, Antietam, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and the Battle of Atlanta. So our standards outline 5 battles that we need to know for the EOCT: Fort Sumter, Antietam, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and Battle of Atlanta. We're going to talk about all 5 of those individually, and then the last part here, we have to make sure we focus on geography and the impact of geography on these battles. How did geography play a role in these battles? That's what we're going to be looking at. So we're focusing on these standards here. Alright, so the Civil War came, and the South squared off against the North, and a general of the Northern Army up here, the Union, I'll be referring to the Northern States and its government as the Union Army, and the Confederate States as the Confederacy or the Southern Army. Of the Union in the North, the general there in the beginning was a man by the name of General Winfield Scott. He was chief commander of the Union Army in 1861, but by November he had become aged and he couldn't get around great. He had been fighting since the War of 1812, so he was getting kind of old. But he come up with a plan to win the Civil War rather quickly, and his plan was called the Anaconda Plan. It was proposed by him at the beginning of the war, and the goal was to win with minimal loss. And his plan was to envelop the South by the sea, put a blockade in the Atlantic Ocean, blockade in the Gulf of Mexico, and then get control of the Mississippi River and cut the South into 2 pieces. And that plan looked like this. Here's the Mississippi. Get control of the Mississippi. After you blockade the Atlantic and after you blockade the Gulf, get control of the Mississippi, and then put pressure in the center of the South here, especially in Atlanta, where these railroads are coming together at this hub where the railroads are. And then take Vicksburg to get control of the Mississippi River here, and you cut the South in 2, divide and conquer here, and then choke it off like this Anaconda is going to do. And so the newspapers put out in the newspapers this plan of his. It looks like an anaconda. It's going to squeeze the South into submission. And so that's the plan. And now with this, the South is going to be left fighting a defensive war. Most of its battles, nearly all of them, will be fought with the South fighting a defensive war, as the North fights on the offensive and puts pressure in on the South while it surrounds it and tries to take the Mississippi River to win the Civil War. So that's the strategy of winning the war. So the South's going to be on the defensive, the North is going to be on the offensive, coming in, trying to conquer the South. There's only 2 battles in which the South is going to go on the offensive, and they're 2 of the ones listed. One in Maryland here, Antietam, and one up in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, and we're going to get to those. Alright, so let's look at the first one, Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter's in South Carolina. We're going to explain the importance of Fort Sumter. Basically, that's where the war began. Fort Sumter, South Carolina. So on April the 12th through the 14th in 1861, Fort Sumter was the first battle where the Civil War began, and it happened in Charleston, South Carolina. Here's Charleston here on the Atlantic Ocean, and here's South Carolina, the state. And right out here there's a fort called Fort Sumter. Here's a little map here. Here's Fort Sumter here. There's Charleston Harbor. Here's Charleston over here, South Carolina, and here's where the fort was located here. And inside the fort, pictures here, and we could actually go there if we went to Google Images. If we went to Google Images, we can actually find Charleston, South Carolina here, and zoom in to South Carolina to the city of Charleston here, and find Fort Sumter, which is located right here in Charleston Harbor, emptying out into the Atlantic Ocean here. So that's where the Civil War begins, right here on this little island, Fort Sumter. It was the federal fort was located here, and the Confederacy had surrounded it, and they were going to take it over. Since South Carolina was in the South, they were going to take that fort back from the Union Army, but the general or the captain inside would not let it go, and he was ordered by Abraham Lincoln to stay there. And Abraham Lincoln uses diplomatic strategies, statesmanship, some good statesmanship to he sends some ship down here to resupply the fort, and in doing that the South opened fire, and he used that as a way of saying that the South started the war. So the war began here at Fort Sumter, South Carolina. Here's a painting that was drawn of South Carolina getting destroyed. Now another thing you can do if you want to is on Google Images, you can zoom all the way down, and you can kind of look inside the fort here. They have some pictures on Google Images. These let's see, here's one of the cannons on the fort. Here's one, let's see, where is it? Yeah, here's one of the fort here. People are visiting inside the fort, get a good look at it. Here's one showing Fort Sumter out here in Charleston Harbor out there. That's Fort Sumter. There's a good picture inside the fort. Just go to Google Images and check that out if you want to get a little closer look at Fort Sumter. Okay, General Winfield Scott was getting a little bit aged, a little bit of age on him, suffering from rheumatism, couldn't get around that well. So on November 1st, 1861, Abraham Lincoln chose George B. McClellan to be the chief commander of the Union Army. So McClellan takes over. There's a reason why I'm going over these leaders like this, because where Robert E. Lee is the chief general of the army in the South, there's going to be several exchanges of chief commanders in the North. Shows you a weakness. Shows a weakness in these commanders in the North until you get Ulysses S. Grant. Alright, explain the importance of Antietam and its geography. Now, Fort Sumter's geography was that it was located in the South, in Charleston, South Carolina, but it was a United States fort, and that's what caused the war. Alright, Antietam was fought September 17th, 1862, the Battle of Antietam. And notice that Antietam is, if we look at this map here, most of the battles, this is not all of them, this is some major ones, are fought in the South, with the South fighting the defensive war. But two are up here in the North. One's in Maryland. Antietam is in Maryland, and then there's Gettysburg in Pennsylvania are fought. Antietam in Maryland was the first time that the South went on the offensive in the war. And here it is. Here's Maryland. Up here in Maryland, let me give you a different picture. Here it is. Antietam battlefield here in Maryland is the first time that the South went on the offensive. And the reason they did, General Robert E. Lee had in his plans 3 different things he wanted to do. Okay, so here's Antietam. His first part of his plan was to seize Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And Harrisburg, Pennsylvania is right over in this area. And it was a vital northern railroad center, a hub for railroads. And the second thing he wanted to do was isolate Washington, D.C., which was the capital of the Union, from the rest of the North. And then thirdly, he wanted to use this victory to convince Great Britain and France to give the South recognition to the Confederacy, Confederate States of America, diplomatic recognition. So that's what Lee wanted to do, and that's why when he was going toward Harrisburg when Antietam occurred, the Battle of Antietam. The Battle of Antietam, one thing you need to remember about them is the single in a single day battle, it is the bloodiest. It is bloodiest single day battle during the Civil War. In one day, 23,000 casualties. And here it is, 12,401 casualties for the Union, for the United States, and then 10,316 casualties for the South. Now this is going to be almost a tie, but the North is going to win. And see, when General Lee took his troops in, he crossed the Potomac River into Maryland, and after the Battle of Antietam, Abraham Lincoln gets upset with McClellan because he doesn't aggressively pursue Robert E. Lee, and he gets away and comes back across the Potomac back into Virginia again. So Abraham Lincoln gets upset with him. Alright, so what's the impact of Antietam? The first impact is Abraham Lincoln replaces General McClellan for not aggressively dealing with General Lee. So he's going to replace McClellan with General Henry Halleck, this guy here, hoping that he can get a more aggressive general that's going to go after Lee and defeat Lee and shorten this war. So that's the first impact of Antietam. Secondly, Great Britain and France were convinced to remain neutral. Since Lee couldn't win, they stayed neutral for the duration of the war and chose not to enter the war to help the South. And thirdly, Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in all the states in rebellion. That means in the South. We're going to get to that later, explain that a little later. And here's a picture of Abraham Lincoln visiting the Antietam battlefield, and this is General McClellan here. Okay. The third battle is we need to explain the importance and geography, impact of geography on Vicksburg. The Battle of Vicksburg happened on May 19th through the 22nd, 1863. The Battle of Vicksburg. Now, the Battle of Vicksburg, some things you need to remember about this. This is in Mississippi. Vicksburg is a city on the Mississippi River in the state of Mississippi. And that's a good way to remember it. So it's a strategic location on the Mississippi River. The North wanted to take the Mississippi River and get control of the Mississippi River to cut the South into two regions. They wanted to divide and conquer, and that was part of this Anaconda plan that we talked about, that Winfield Scott come up with, and there's the Anaconda there. Part of it was to take this Mississippi River by taking Vicksburg, this major city. And that's going to separate Arkansas, Texas, Louisiana, the western part of the South, with the other Confederate states. So geographically, Vicksburg, the city, lies right on the on the Mississippi River in the state of Mississippi. And if the North can get control of Vicksburg, it can get control of New Orleans down here, it can get control of the Mississippi River, and split this South in two different regions. These Confederate states over here against these Confederate states. So Vicksburg is going to be a turning point of the war. And why? Well, here's the Confederate states before the war. This is the size of the Confederate states before Vicksburg. And here's the impact of Vicksburg. Okay, so the South is essentially cut into two regions and becomes smaller and is separated from one another, so they can't resupply or maneuver between here and here. So, and now here's the pressure is going to come in through here. Here's the strategy of this Anaconda plan. So let's look at it again. Here's the importance of Vicksburg. There's the South before, there's the South after. And here's right here, the city of Vicksburg right here. When they take it and they take New Orleans, it's going to split the South in two because the Mississippi River is going to be taken. Alright. The next battle is Gettysburg. Explain the importance of Gettysburg, and then we need to talk about the impact of geography. Now, Gettysburg happened, the battle happened on July 1st, 1863. And of course, after this is when Abraham Lincoln gives the Gettysburg Address on November 19th, 1863. So we said a few moments ago that, Antietam was an offensive battle, the first one. Gettysburg is going to be the second and last offensive battle carried out by the South. And again, we looked at this map. Most of the battles carried out in the South. Gettysburg is the second battle where the South tries to go on the offensive. Now, what's the impact of this Battle of Gettysburg? It becomes a turning point as well. So Vicksburg is a turning point because it splits the South in two, but Gettysburg becomes an impact or turning point because there's going to be so many casualties. There's over 43,000 casualties, and the war lasts for 3 days. So the South would never invade the North again, and it would fight defensively until the end of the war. But the real big impact is that the South suffered such great casualties and lost so many war items and materials and goods that it left it with very few resources to continue this fight against the North. And they would never regain their original strength as pre-war status. So it signaled to a lot of people that the South was heading toward its downfall. It was inevitable. It was coming. The South was going to lose. This Battle of Gettysburg showed that. And then after that, Abraham Lincoln dedicated a cemetery on the Gettysburg battlefield. And if we want to, we can also go to Antietam. Here's Antietam in Maryland. Let's go there and look. Let's do that. Here's Antietam in Maryland. Antietam National Battlefield. You can go there if you want to. Let's look here. Here's the Potomac River. Here's where Grant come across the Potomac. There's Antietam. What was he heading for? Let's see if we can find Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There it is. Wait, let's see. Right here. Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So that's what he's heading for, and there's Antietam, or the Battle of Antietam, 1 day, single bloodiest battle we talked about. And then let's look at Vicksburg here. You should use Google maps to do that. There's Louisiana, there's the Mississippi River going up, and let's find Vicksburg, Mississippi. There it is, right there on the Mississippi River. You can use Google Images to look on there and find these locations geographically where these battles took place and kind of get an idea why they're geographically important. And let's look at Gettysburg. That's what we're talking about now. It's in Pennsylvania here. Let's go there to Gettysburg. There it is, below Harrisonburg, above Antietam. There's Gettysburg Cemetery and Museum right here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Google Maps, Google Images are all pretty good if you can use them this way to learn, geographically where these things were taking place, where the battles were taking place. Here's a painting of the Battle of Gettysburg. Alright, and to the last battle, explain the importance of Battle of Atlanta. We're going to talk about the geography. It is here before this battle that General Halleck is replaced by Lincoln with General Ulysses S. Grant, U.S. Grant. And U.S. Grant here is going to be the aggressive general that Lincoln wanted. He's going to be the one that he calls for, really the one he wanted to carry out what he wanted to do. Halleck is going to go back to Washington, D.C. and is going to communicate with U.S. Grant and help him, but General U.S. Grant is going to be the chief commander of the Union Army. Is finally going to bring it to an end. He eventually becomes the president of the United States after the war. He's on the $50 bill. Excuse me. Just don't make that mistake again. Keeping up with tradition here. $50 bill. I don't get to see many of these, but there he is, U.S. Grant. And he's on a commemorative coin as well. All right. So General U.S. Grant is going to be the aggressive general that Lincoln wanted, and he, along with William Tecumseh Sherman, when we talked about in the last video, they're going to come up with this total war, scorched earth policy, where they take the war to the people of the South. They've already split the South in two. They got the Mississippi River. Now they're going to put pressure on Atlanta and Georgia in the center of the heart of the South. So this strategy used by William T. Sherman and U.S. Grant during the Civil War made the people feel the hard hand of the war, and they're going to burn homes, kill animals, ruin crops, destroy on the march to the sea to Savannah. And this Battle of Atlanta is going to take place in July 22nd, 1864. And one of the big reasons, you know, we talked about before, they had already taken Vicksburg. Sherman and Grant wanted to put pressure right here, put pressure on the South, make it buckle. And one of the reasons they went into Atlanta is because it was a major railway hub where all the railroads in the heart of the South come into one place. And all these soldiers and supplies and goods that the Confederacy was using to move around and mobilizing the army come right through Atlanta. And so Sherman and Grant knew that Atlanta was a strategic place to attack. So Atlanta's geographic importance was that it was a railway hub or center of the Confederate railroads in the south of the Confederate States of America, right here. So if you destroy it, you destroy the Confederate States of America and the Confederate Army, its ability to resupply its troops or move goods that are vitally needed for war. So if you destroy that, then you're well on your way to ending the war, and then burn that way to Savannah, total war, to taking it to the people so they'll complain to the Confederate States government to end the war. That was the idea. So these railroads around Atlanta and this railway hub down here in the heart of the South that takes like cannons and rifles and pistols and even soldiers from place to place is going to be attacked by Sherman in the Battle of Atlanta. That's why it's going to be such a geographically important place to attack. Here's the Atlanta train depot in 1864 after it was rebuilt. And here's actually that was before the war, excuse me, or 1864, before the Battle of Atlanta. Yeah. And here's what it looked like afterward. Of course, this isn't the picture right here, and here's what it looked like after Sherman went through there. So here's Peachtree Street today is a busy place. Here's Sherman's troops sitting there on Peachtree Street with cannons. And one of the things on his march to the sea he wants to do, Sherman wants to put pressure on the South. He's going to cripple the South's will to fight. The people are going to go crying to Richmond up here and telling all these Confederate officials to end this war. They're tired of losing everything. So destroy everything from Atlanta on this march to the sea all the way to Savannah is what Sherman's going to do to bring this war to the South, this total war to the people. On its way, he's going to get railroads, whatever he can. He's going to twist them up, and they refer to them as Sherman hairpins. How you get the rails up and you heat them up and bend them around trees and twist them. Okay. Also, another thing about William Tecumseh Sherman's victory in Atlanta, his march to the sea, is it helped boost President Lincoln's popularity and helped him win his second election. And so Abraham Lincoln was able to give the second inaugural address. We've already talked about how important that was, showing that the country needed to reunite, that we didn't need to punish the South. He wanted to preserve the Union. So that's another thing the battle is. All right, so let's summarize here these key battles. There's 5 of them. Fort Sumter's basically where the Civil War began, located in South Carolina. He tried to supply it. Lincoln tried to supply it to force the South to attack and become the aggressor during the war. And we heard him refer to the South as an aggressor. Antietam, Emancipation Proclamation, was issued afterward, and it was a close battle with a Northern victory. The first time the South went on the offensive France and Great Britain stayed out of the war because of the north winds, and this happened in Maryland. Gettysburg was a turning point because the South lost so much it could never recover to its original standing, and then Lincoln gives the Gettysburg Address. The second time the South went on the offensive, it's going to lose, and it's never going to fight an offensive stance again, defensive for the rest of the war. Vicksburg was a turning point because it splits the South into two regions on the Mississippi River, and the North gets control of the Mississippi River. Atlanta, major railway hub, a vitally important railway hub that the Confederacy used to resupply and move troops. Sherman's going to attack it, burn it to the ground, twist those rails up in the hairpins, and this is going to help Lincoln get reelected, and he's going to give his second inaugural address. I hope this helps you. If not, just go back over it, pause this, read over this summarization, and ask questions of class, of course. Good luck on the quiz. Ask me anything you need to in class. All right, bye. Individually, and then the last part here, we have to make sure we focus on geography and the impact of geography on these battles. How did geography play a role in these battles? That's what we're going to be looking at. So we're focusing on these standards here. All right, so the Civil War came, and the South squared off against the North. And a general of the Northern Army up here, the Union, I'll be referring to the Northern States and its government as the Union Army, and the Confederate States as the Confederacy or the Southern Army. Of the Union in the North, the general there in the beginning was a man by the name of General Winfield Scott. He was chief commander of the Union Army in 1861. But by November he had become aged and he couldn't get around great. He had been fighting since the War of 1812, so he was getting kind of old. But he come up with a plan to win the Civil War rather quickly, and his plan was called the Anaconda Plan. It was proposed by him at the beginning of the war, and the goal was to win with minimal loss. And his plan was to envelop the South by the sea. Put a blockade in the Atlantic Ocean, blockade in the Gulf of Mexico, and then get control of the Mississippi River and cut the South into two pieces. And that plan looked like this. Here's the Mississippi. Get control of the Mississippi. After you blockade the Atlantic and after you blockade the Gulf, get control of the Mississippi, and then put pressure in the center of the South here, especially in Atlanta where these railroads are coming together at this hub where the railroads are. And then take Vicksburg to get control of the Mississippi River here, and you cut the South in two, divide and conquer here, and then choke it off like this Anaconda is going to do. And so the newspapers put out in the newspapers this plan of his. It looks like an anaconda. It's going to squeeze the South into submission, and so that's the plan. And now with this, the South is going to be left fighting a defensive war. Most of its battles, nearly all of them. Okay, we're going to be talking about the battles of the Civil War, just the major ones, not all of them. There's over 200 battles in the Civil War, so we're going to talk about the major battles. Standard 9 says the student will identify key events relating to the course of the Civil War, and in that course we're going to talk about these battles. 9D, explain the importance of Fort Sumter, Antietam, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and the Battle of Atlanta. So our standards outline 5 battles that we need to know for the EOCT: Fort Sumter, Antietam, Vicksburg, Gettysburg, and Battle of Atlanta. We're going to talk about all 5 of those. Them will be fought with the South fighting a defensive war as the North fights on the offensive and puts pressure in on the South while it surrounds it and tries to take the Mississippi River to win the Civil War. So that's the strategy of winning the war. So the South's going to be on the defensive, The North is going to be on the offensive coming in, trying to conquer the South. There's only 2 battles in which the South is going to go on the offensive, and they're 2 of the ones listed. One in Maryland here, Antietam, and one up in Pennsylvania, Gettysburg, and we're going to get to those. Alright, so let's look at the first one, Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter's in South Carolina.